Hello, I'm Avon. I used to believe family meant a home, security, and love. However, on the day of my 30th birthday, my parents handed me a packed suitcase and evicted me with their silent actions. Not a word of thanks, not a single goodbye. Just one cold command. You're too old to be living off us anymore. I paid their bills, I covered their debts. I kept the utilities running in the house. But somehow, I was still the one who could be thrown away. But the worst part wasn't being thrown out of the house. It was realizing I had been used for years. And I had never even noticed. When I finally stood up for myself, they tried to completely destroy me. Before we get deeper into the story, what time is it and where are you listening to this from? Leave a comment down below. We'd love to hear your story as well. Because some storms, you don't just survive them. You grow and move past them. I drove the car into the cracked driveway. The sun had already sunk below the horizon, casting the small town of Ridgeway, Ohio in a deep blue twilight. The air carried the chill of early autumn. That kind of chill that slips under your jacket collar, making you instinctively pull yourself inward. I reached over the passenger seat and picked up that small cake box. The only thing I had gotten for myself today. $20, vanilla frosting. With happy birthday, Yvonne. Written in crooked red icing. Because I didn't want to correct the tired teenager behind the counter. When I stepped into the house, something felt wrong. It wasn't that I was expecting a surprise party, or even hoping for a half-hearted card. Years ago, I understood that my parents, Cullen and Vera, had long since given up the idea of celebrating anything for me. But even so, there was an unusual, deathly silence in the air tonight. Thicker than usual. The kitchen lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a pale, unforgiving light. Dinner was already set on the table. Meatloaf, canned green beans, and boxed mashed potatoes. I hadn't even had a chance to take off my coat when Cullen yelled from his chair at the head of the table. You're late. I quietly placed the cake on the counter. The crinkling of the bag was louder than I'd intended. Worked late, had to wrap up some reports. My voice was level, composed, without apology. Vera spoke not a word. Just fidgeted with her fork, never looking up. Cullen grunted, pouring himself another inch of whiskey into his chipped glass. I hung my coat on the hook and took a seat, feeling the tension spread like a spiderweb across the room. Dinner began. Knives scraped on plates. The clinking of glasses, the occasional forced cough. No happy birthday. No acknowledgement. Just the mechanical cadence of chewing and swallowing. I raised my fork, shoving a sad pile of potatoes around on my plate. I should have sensed something was about to happen. Cullen wasn't the kind to let things simmer for long. Halfway through his meal, he slammed his fork down hard. So hard that Vera flinched in her seat. The sound shot right up my spine. He leaned back, gazing at me as if he were looking at something foul. You're too old to be freeloading. His voice was icy and rehearsed. It's time for you to leave. For a moment, the words just hung in the air, surreal. I blinked at him, then shot a look at Vera, searching for some kind of rebuttal. Some indication this was just a drunken tirade. She kept her gaze fixed downward. Her lips pressed so tightly together they were white. I pay the internet bill, I stated calmly. The electricity, half the mortgage, groceries. My voice didn't waver, it didn't break. Just facts laid out on the table between us. Cullen let out a laugh. A short, sharp bark that stung like a slap. Paying a few bills doesn't get you a lifetime pass. Princess. Princess. The pet name he'd used when I was a child. Climbing onto his lap, with scraped knees and crooked pigtails. Now it was twisted, a weapon. I choked back whatever had just shattered in my chest. This was no spontaneous outburst. It was calculated, premeditated. They had chosen this day, of all days, to deal the blow. My birthday was not a celebration. It was a final deadline. I pushed my plate aside. The meatloaf, the cake in its box, the heaviness in the room. It all settled in my stomach like a ton of bricks. I rose slowly, their eyes tracking my every move. Perhaps anticipating a scene. Tears, begging. Some pitiful scene that would validate their cruelty. Instead, I gave a single, sharp, final nod. Got it, I said. Cullen smirked, as if he'd won some unspoken game. Vera kept her head bowed, shame gathering in the slump of her shoulders. But not enough to make her protest. Not enough to prevent me from being cast aside. I headed for the stairs, stopping for just a moment by the counter, where the cake still sat in its bag. The plastic handle was stretched from its weight, cutting into the soft cardboard of the box. One candle had fallen out. The silly little box had probably just been knocked around in the car, but it felt symbolic nonetheless. One missing candle. One missing person, one missing family. I took the cake upstairs without a backward glance, each stair groaning under my weight, loud, accusatory, final. I shut my bedroom door behind me and leaned back against it, the hollow sound echoing in my chest. This house was never my own. Perhaps it never had been. I sat on the bed for a long time, staring at the luggage, which I had been too scared to finish packing over the last few weeks. A part of me knew this was inevitable. Maybe not today, maybe not this cruelly, but someday. I thought I still had more time. I thought I could fix things if I just kept helping. I took off my jacket and folded it neatly on the suitcase. My hands were steady, deliberate. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because I was finished. As I moved about the room, collecting a few last items, my mind started running through the logistics. Like a well-oiled machine. Cancel the autopay for the utilities. Redirect my paychecks to my personal account. Not the joint one my mother insisted I maintain. For emergencies. Find a storage unit until I could sort out the rest. They didn't just kick me out tonight. They also forfeited everything I had ever provided, without expecting anything in return. Outside my window, the wind grew stronger, shaking the last of the stubborn leaves from the maples that lined the street. It was another reminder that winter was approaching fast, and I would not be here when it arrived. As I zipped my suitcase shut, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. The same brown hair tied back in a messy bun. The same weary green eyes. But something had changed. A boundary had been crossed. A boundary I couldn't go back over, even if I wanted to. I walked back to the bed and sat down heavily. The cake rested on my nightstand, now looking ridiculously small. I hadn't even bothered to buy candles. Not that there would have been anyone here to sing anyway. The scent of cheap frosting filled the air, cloyingly sweet. I stared at the box. The lonely smear of frosting, peeking through the plastic window. Then, without thinking, I swept it off the nightstand. It landed with a dull thud. Cake and cardboard crumpling on the worn carpet. Happy birthday, Yvonne. I sat on the side of my bed. The silence of my room. A palpable presence pressing in on me. My suitcase was only half full, yawning open as if to mock my hesitation. Outside, the wind rustled against the old windows, rattling the loose panes that no one had ever gotten around to fixing. The entire house seemed to groan under the weight of its own neglect. And I suddenly perceived it for what it truly was. Not a home, but a place I was permitted to stay. Until I was no longer of use. My eyes wandered to the cake, now a crumpled mess on the floor. Its smashed frosting looked absurd. A childish hope smeared on the beige carpet fibers. I tore my gaze away and looked instead at the drab gray suitcase. Its worn handle slick from years of travel. It wasn't just clothing that filled its contents. It was years of compensating for their shortcomings, mending their fractured lives, while my own was left to decay. Memories rushed in like a bitter flood. I recalled the time Cullen broke a molar during one of his drinking spells. He couldn't pay for the procedure. Not with the overdue mortgage bills stacking up on the kitchen counter. So I drew from my savings, the money I had been quietly setting aside for my own apartment, and paid for it all in cash. No thank you, no recognition. Just a grunt when he returned from the dentist, drooling and swearing the entire way in. Or the winter Vera's bald tires sent her skidding off the road. She called me in a frenzy, stranded miles from town. I left work early, bought her a complete new set, and even covered the toe. She patted my hand once, saying, "You're a good girl," before handing me the repair bill, which she also expected me to handle. When the roof began to leak last spring, I was the one on the ladder, nailing down shingles in the driving rain. Cullen sat inside with a beer, yelling about how you can't trust these contractors anymore, while his own daughter, the one he called a freeloader, was saving the damn house from ruin. None of that mattered. None of it bought me a place at their table tonight. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes, until spots of light danced behind my eyelids. The sorrow was still there, but it was colder now, hardening into something more resilient. The floorboards creaked as I got up, snatching my phone from the nightstand. My feet took me downstairs, my steps quiet out of long habit. In the living room, the glow from the television cast my parents in an unsettling blue light. Cullen was sprawled in his recliner, beer in hand. Vera sat rigidly on the edge of the sofa. Her eyes glazed over and unfocused. They seemed fine. As if nothing had occurred. As if tonight were just another Wednesday. Where they ate their meal. And acted as if the world was in their debt. I stood there, waiting. Perhaps a part of me still held out hope. Still. Foolishly believed that Vera would look over. And see me, that Cullen would sober up. And recall who had kept the power on. When his paychecks didn't clear. But hope is a treacherous thing. And tonight, it was extinguished. Cullen saw me first. His lip curled into a sneer. As he casually lifted his beer can. Don't forget to turn the lights out when you go. He slurred. You're not paying for them anymore. Those words cut deeper than any physical blow ever could. They weren't just showing me the door. They were nullifying every sacrifice, every unspoken loan. I didn't reply. I didn't yell or weep or plead. Instead, I allowed the silence to consume. The last fragment of me. That had ever craved their acceptance. I turned and went back up the stairs. Each step more deliberate than the last. The weight in my heart more burdensome than any luggage. When I got to my room, I closed the door gently. Placing my palm against the wood. As if to wall off the part of me that had once thought blood meant allegiance. For a long minute, I just stood there. Breathing in the musty scent of old carpeting. And faded memories. Then, with a firm hand, I retrieved my laptop from under the bed. And placed it on the nightstand. If they imagined they could just cast me off. And continue to subsist on the provisions I left behind. They were about to learn a hard lesson. I opened the laptop. Its screen filling the room with a soft, clinical light. My fingers flew across the keyboard, instinctively. Years of paying bills. And managing online transfers. Had made the actions feel like second nature. One by one, I accessed the accounts, electric, water, gas. All registered under my name. I paused over the cancel service button. On the utilities website. My fingers shaking just for a second. Before I pressed down decisively. The electricity bill, gone. The water bill, gone. The gas bill, gone. Each click was like severing an invisible rope. That had bound me here. In a house where love was a matter of convenience. And betrayal came cloaked in silence. Next up was the bank account. The one my mother had insisted we share. For emergencies. I transferred my remaining savings to a private account. I had opened months before. Back when a small inner voice had whispered that this day was coming. Transfer complete. The cable and internet services were next. Services they consumed daily, thoughtlessly. Never considering that my name was on the statements. My salary paying for their marathon TV sessions. And constant scrolling. Cancel, cancel, cancel. Each action was a small act of reclaiming the power they never thought I possessed. I hesitated briefly at the auto insurance. Cullen's truck, Vera's old Camry. Both were on my policy to save them a couple of $100 a month. I could almost hear Vera's voice from the previous year. Sweet and cloying, saying, "You're so savvy with money, honey, it just makes sense." Yes, for them it did. I clicked remove vehicle for each one. My heart pounding in my chest, not from anxiety, but from a grim sense of justice. When the last account had been dealt with, I shut the laptop with a quiet click. The silence in the room felt different now. Lighter, clearer. This wasn't about retaliation. It wasn't even about rage anymore. It was about restoring balance. They wanted me out? Fine. But they were finally going to understand what it meant to lose the daughter who had held their unstable little world in place with unseen threads. Downstairs, the TV continued to drone on. A sitcom's canned laughter drifting up the stairs. I wondered how long it would be before the lights went out. Before the furnace gave its final cough. Before the real world pierced their small bubble of self-importance. I wasn't going to be there to see it. Tomorrow, I would be gone. But tonight, I began to dismantle the foundation they had so recklessly constructed. On my own back. The light from the laptop screen faded slightly. As I sat back, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. It was almost midnight. And the house had settled into a misleadingly calm quiet. Outside my window, the oak trees whispered softly in the late autumn breeze, carrying the crisp smell of dry leaves and the first hints of the approaching winter. For a second, I sat motionless, letting the exhaustion sink deep into my bones. It wasn't just the physical toll of the day that weighed on me. I was worn out from years of shouldering burdens that were never once appreciated. But weariness was an indulgence I couldn't allow myself tonight. I cracked my knuckles quietly, took a deep breath, and got to work. First on the list was the electricity. I had been the one in charge of the account ever since Dad had neglected to pay it one winter, and we had spent 2 days with no heat. My password went smoothly into the login field. In moments, I was at the payment settings. My heart resolute, my mind clearer than it had been in a long time. Remove payment method. A confirmation message appeared on the screen. I clicked submit without a second thought. Next up was the water. Same procedure. I turned off the autopay, erasing my debit card details. With a grim sense of finality. I wasn't just departing. I was methodically, surgically removing myself from every system that sustained this home. Netflix was next. I nearly chuckled at the profile names, Dad's, Mom's, and even one called Family Movie Night. A cruel irony, given we hadn't had one in almost 10 years. Delete account. Internet service, gone. Cell phone plan extras, gone. My personal Amazon Prime membership, unlinked from the shared family address. Each click wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of survival. A truth made real through action. After about an hour, I set the laptop aside and took out a yellow legal pad from my nightstand. I listed everything I had cut off. Everything that would cease to function once the sun rose over the siding of this decaying house. I needed to see it in black and white. The final accounting of all the things they had always assumed would be there. As I wrote down the last item, a flood of old, unwelcome memories returned. Late nights at work. Staying an extra 2 hours to earn just enough overtime to pay for an unexpected furnace repair. The trips I gave up so Vera could get a new alternator. The birthdays I missed. My own celebrations because there was always something more pressing they required of me. I gripped the pen more firmly, willing my hand to be still. This wasn't about getting even with them. It was about my refusal to be their fallback plan any longer. As I scrolled through my banking app, I located the emergency savings account I had established years before. Back then, I had innocently believed it was a smart move. Something to make sure our family would never have to face another winter without heat or a summer without power. My name was first on the account. But I had given them access as well because they were family. I selected the option to put a temporary hold on the account. No deposits, no withdrawals. It would take them weeks of paperwork and multiple signatures just to start the process of unfreezing it. And by that time, I would be far away. When the confirmation message appeared, the tight knot in my chest finally started to ease. I had offered them everything: money, time, loyalty, second chances. Tonight, for the very first time, I put myself first. A new email alert appeared. It was from Tyler, my cousin. He had sent a brief message. A meme of a cartoon dog in a burning room. With the caption, "This is fine." No text, just the image. I let out a mirthless laugh. Tyler, for all his shortcomings, always had a sense of when things were going wrong. I considered writing back but chose not to. I didn't want to involve him in this mess. He was family by relation, but he wasn't part of this rot. Some fires are best left to burn alone. Instead, I started a new email draft, typing out a subject line with robotic precision. You told me to go, and so did my financial support. I looked at the flashing cursor, my fingers hovering over the send key, my heart pounding once, twice. And then I closed the window. They didn't merit a justification. They merited the same silence they had offered me tonight. The time on my laptop changed to 1:57 a.m. The house groaned and shifted. And from somewhere downstairs, a bottle clinked against the edge of the sink. I pictured Vera on the sofa, her wine glass in hand, watching old shows as if her world wasn't about to shift. The furnace kicked in. A low, mechanical rumble echoing through the floor. It was likely the last comfortable night they would have for some time. I rechecked every cancellation, every hold, every service cut off. All set to go into effect at dawn. tidy, final, and irreversible. By tomorrow, when Cullen tried to turn on a light or heat up his coffee in the microwave, there would be no power. When Vera tried to buy her morning coffee with the joint bank card, it would be rejected. When the internet went down, in the middle of whatever show she was watching, they would understand. They would feel the impact. I didn't smile. I didn't weep. I just felt a void. But it was the kind of void that held the promise of being filled with something better in the future. At 2 a.m., I shut the laptop with a gentle click and leaned back in my chair, watching the shadows play across my ceiling. My suitcase was packed. My car, parked a couple of blocks away to be discreet, was already loaded with my belongings. Tomorrow, I would leave this town, this decaying monument to duty and bitterness. Tomorrow, they would awaken to a reality without the daughter they had always taken for granted. The morning sun had barely filtered through the cheap blinds of Nora's apartment when my phone started to vibrate insistently on the nightstand. Sleepily, I pulled the blanket up higher, foolishly wishing it was just a wrong number. But one look at the screen dispelled that illusion. 12 missed calls. Vera. Cullen. A few numbers I didn't recognize. Likely neighbors or distant relatives. I didn't check the voicemails at first. I just looked at the list, feeling a tangled mix of emotions knotting up in my chest. A brief pang of guilt tried to emerge. I pushed it away. They had made their decision. I rolled onto my back and read Tyler's message first. It was direct, straight to the point, as he always was. Internet is out, no power. Dad's livid, Mom's in tears. I let my phone drop onto the bed beside me and looked up at the cracked ceiling. It had started, and I wasn't there to solve it. Not this time. A new alert sounded, a voicemail. My curiosity won out, and I put it on speaker as I got dressed. Vera's voice, frail and trembling. Avon, honey, there has to be a mistake. You wouldn't do this to us. Please, call me. We can sort this out. We're family. I shut my eyes for a second, letting her words linger in the quiet room. It was remarkable how fast Freeloader reverted to family the moment the internet cut out. Another buzz, a text from Cullen. You'll be sorry you turned your back on your family. No warmth in his words. No confusion, only fury. I put the phone on silent and set it face down on the nightstand. Nora walked into the living room, holding 2 cups of coffee. Dressed in a baggy sweatshirt, her hair a mess from sleep. She didn't speak right away. Just passed me a mug and settled on the floor beside the bed. After taking a long drink, she said, "You have the look of someone who just found out their winning lottery ticket has expired." I gave a short, humorless laugh. "They're freaking out," I said plainly. Nora rested her head on the wall, her knees tucked in. "Good," she said, her voice steady. "Sometimes, saving your own life isn't a betrayal. It's a necessity." We sat like that for some time, listening to the distant sounds of a garbage truck making its way down the block. Later in the day, I went with Nora to a community gathering at the nearby church. It was a typical autumn fair, with pies, pumpkins, and stalls selling handmade soaps. Small-town life in all its comforting predictability. I kept to the sidelines, trying to stay unnoticed. But it wasn't long before the murmurs found me. Cullen was there. He was standing by the apple bobbing station, his voice just loud enough to draw a crowd. I didn't need to be close to make out his words. "My daughter walked out on us," he proclaimed. "After all we did for her. Kids today. No sense of duty, no gratitude." Some people looked his way, some nodding in agreement. But others gave each other wary looks. This wasn't the first time Cullen had made a public spectacle of his family issues, and people had long memories. Nora gently nudged me. "Don't," she whispered. I hadn't even noticed I'd begun to walk in his direction. I stopped, took a deep breath. Let him complain, let him be the martyr. I didn't have to give him an audience. Instead, I strolled past the stalls, overhearing bits and pieces of conversations. Didn't his daughter cover their expenses for years? Isn't she the one who stayed at home to care for her when the mother was ill? Strange how she's all of a sudden the bad guy. The general opinion was shifting, slowly, like a subtle tide, receding from my parents' influence. Cullen and Vera could tell their tales. But the facade was starting to crack. And the town wasn't so quick to forget. Later that evening, back at Nora's, I looked through the messages friends had sent me. Pictures of the house. The porch light dark, newspapers collecting on the steps. A message saying Cullen had gotten into a verbal fight with a representative from the power company. In full view of the neighbors. They weren't embarrassed by how they had treated me. They were just embarrassed that they couldn't keep it hidden any longer. As the sun went down over the familiar neighborhood, casting long, violet shadows over the quiet streets, I stood at Nora's window and observed the town as it prepared for the night. Somewhere close by, the house that had once consumed all of my energy and affection was now dark. This time, I didn't go back to fix it. The house went dark, and a piece of me went with it. But as night turned into day, the world outside continued on. People went to their jobs. Dogs greeted the mail carrier. Children's laughter filled the air at the bus stop. Life didn't stop. Just because my own had been fractured. 3 days went by in a haze of trying to establish a new sense of normalcy. I threw myself into chores, sorting through the papers that were spread out on Nora's dining table, deep cleaning the bathroom we both used, polishing my resume for the 10th time. Anything to keep my hands busy. Anything to stop my mind from wandering to them. But the mind is a persistent thing. It was in the middle of the morning when my phone buzzed once more. That all too familiar vibration. That made my heart race. I nearly ignored it. Nearly. The message was from Vera. After all we sacrificed for you. Is this how you treat us? Your father's health is declining. He hasn't had anything to eat in 2 days. I stood in the middle of the small apartment. The phone feeling heavy in my hand. My stomach tightening into painful knots. The guilt hit me, swift and piercing. Slicing into me. As if it had been lying in wait just under my skin. I sank down onto the old sofa, reading the message over and over until the words blurred. Images I didn't want to see flashed through my mind. Birthday celebrations with homemade desserts. Late-night conversations in the family room. Shared laughter over a burnt Thanksgiving meal. Childhood memories. That clashed with the harshness of recent times. But felt achingly real in that moment. What if they were genuinely in distress? What if my response was too severe? The guilt crept in deeper as the day wore on. It wasn't just Vera's text. The phone calls began to come in. From distant family members I hardly ever talked to. Who now suddenly believed they had a right to their say. You know your father has a weak heart. Aunt Marcy's voice purred from a voicemail. All families have their disagreements, sure. But to shut them out completely like this? It's just heartless. Think of your mother, Uncle Phil's message read. She's a delicate woman. This could be the end of her. Each new message chipped away at my determination. Maybe I was cruel. Maybe I was the one at fault in this situation. Maybe. My phone buzzed once more. A text from Tyler. Short and to the point. Dad's telling Mom to pretend she's having chest pains next. If the guilt trip doesn't work. I stared at the screen. The impact of that one brief sentence. Driving the air from my lungs. So that was their strategy. Not reconciliation, not empathy, not taking responsibility. Just another manipulation. They didn't long for me. They longed for what I could provide for them. Feeling numb, I dropped the phone on the coffee table. And pulled my knees to my chest on the sofa. The sunlight moved across the room. It's slow. Golden rays tracing patterns on Nora's old rug. As the hours passed, I let the full weight of it all settle on me. Not fighting it this time. The years of accommodating them. The unacknowledged sacrifices. The constant giving. All in the hope that it would be enough to secure a place at a table. That was never really meant for me. It was no longer just sadness. It was something colder, more defined. I didn't stir. Until Nora got back from her shift at the hospital. Her shoes making a faint squeak on the wooden floor. Are you all right? She asked, setting her bag down by the entrance. I gave a slow nod, because for the first time I was. After she went into the kitchen, I picked up my phone. I went through my contacts list, one by one. Cullen, Vera, Aunt Marcy, Uncle Phil. Every cousin and far-flung relative. Who had reached out to reprimand me. But not one of them had called to see how I was doing. One by one, I pressed delete. I didn't rush. I didn't shed a tear. I just methodically erased them. When I was finished, I went into my settings. And blocked every phone number associated with that house. that counterfeit sense of home. It wasn't a gesture of anger. It was an act of compassion for myself. I set the phone face down on the table and leaned back, taking a deep breath. For what seemed like the first time in ages, tomorrow would bring new challenges. I wasn't so naive as to believe that cutting them out would resolve everything. But for tonight, I had achieved a small victory. When I set my phone down, after blocking every number connected to them, I anticipated the turmoil in my life to vanish, like a heavy winter coat being cast off. But what followed was an unsettling silence, as if the whole world was waiting in suspense. The first couple of days went by without incident. I kept myself occupied helping Nora declutter her place, sending out applications for jobs in other towns, even making dinner for the two of us. Small gestures to reclaim a sense of routine. I almost believed, just for a moment, that I had escaped the chaos they had tried to sow in my life. Then, it began. It happened on a Thursday morning. Just as the autumn air started to seep in through the windows. I was drinking some lukewarm coffee from one of Nora's worn-out mugs, when my phone vibrated on the table. At first, I assumed it was another email from a potential employer. But it was a text from Carrie, a former colleague. "Hey. Have you seen your dad's latest post?" Intrigued, I clicked on the link. And there it was, spread all over the local town's online forum, like a raw, open wound. Cullen's words seared into my mind. Some daughters are brought up to be appreciative. Others grow up to be vipers. After all we gave up for her, our daughter has left us sick, hungry, and alone. Please keep us in your prayers. The post had already garnered over 100 replies. Some sent their well wishes. Others, people I hardly knew, cast their judgments like rocks. "What an ungrateful child," one said. "Your parents give you everything, and you just throw it back in their faces." Another person commented. For a moment, my hands trembled so much I nearly let the phone fall. Nora looked up from the kitchen. Her forehead wrinkled. "Bad?" I could only give a slight nod, clutching the phone to my chest, as if that could ease the pain building inside me. By the afternoon, the damage had spread. Screenshots filled my phone, sent by friends who were still looking out for me. Neighbors, distant relatives, even old teachers, were all weighing in on how they always thought there was something off about that girl. Nora came and sat opposite me, her voice firm and resolute. "They're taking control of your narrative. Are you just going to stand by and let them?" I looked at her, her words hitting home more than I wanted to acknowledge. No. Not again. I turned off my phone and went to the drawer, where I kept the file. My defense, my evidence. Inside was a meticulously organized collection. Years of bills, screenshots, emails, and bank records. Evidence of the thousands of dollars I had poured into that home, into those individuals, without ever asking for a word of thanks. Utility bills in my name. Mortgage payments drawn from my personal account. Home repairs paid for with my overtime earnings. They had forgotten the true cost, because they had never been the ones to pay it. But I remembered. I dedicated the next several hours to scanning papers and arranging digital files. Each bill was a reminder, and each reminder was like a sharp edge, chipping away at any lingering sympathy I might have had. By nightfall, I had prepared my case. A solid, undeniable wall of facts. Nora came to the doorway, her voice soft. "Are you going to share it?" I looked up from my computer and shook my head. "Not right away," I replied. "Let them keep talking for a bit longer. Let them reveal their true colors to everyone." Because I was aware of something Cullen and Vera had overlooked. I wasn't charging into this fight blindly. I wasn't lashing out like a cornered creature. I was now calm, deliberate. The small town we were in was fueled by rumors, but it also tended to change its tune quickly when the facts came out. All I needed to do was bide my time, waiting for the perfect moment to expose their deception. The moment when their fabrications became too big to sustain themselves. And when that time came, I wouldn't need to say a lot. Just the facts. That evening, as Nora and I shared leftover pasta on the sofa, she held up her fork to me as if in a celebratory gesture. "To staying alive," she said. I gave a small smile and raised my own fork. "To never having to apologize for saving yourself." Later, as I lay awake in the spare room, I thought about Cullen's words again. Some daughters are brought up to be appreciative. In a sense, he was not wrong. I had been appreciative. Even when they starved me of affection, drained my finances, and treated me like I didn't exist. But that was over now. By the time I finally fell asleep, I wasn't just weathering their storm of lies anymore. I was on the verge of burying them with the truth. They never imagined I would have the courage to tell. The choice was made. There was no going back. I was at the small dining table in Nora's apartment. My laptop open. My heart pounding in my chest, but my hands were firm. The room had the smell of old coffee. And the lingering scent of rain from the previous night. Commonplace smells. That stood in stark contrast to the significant event that was about to happen. With great care, I posted the information. It wasn't written in anger or with emotion. It was factual. First, screenshots of my years of paying for utilities. Power, water, and internet. Each showing my name and a clear date. Next were the bank records. Displaying the mortgage payments. Deducted from my account each month. Even when Cullen's income had been sufficient to handle them. I attached old emails between myself and the property manager. Messages that confirmed I had paid for the maintenance. That had kept the house from falling apart during the cold Ohio winters. To conclude, I provided a concise summary. The years I gave up travel, birthday parties, and even basic self-care to ensure they had a home. And then, the final part. A straightforward declaration. When they told me to go, they didn't just lose a daughter. They lost the one who kept the power on. When they weren't paying attention. I clicked post. For a second, there was just quiet. Only the low drone of the refrigerator broke the silence. Then my phone started to buzz. It began gradually. A couple of likes, a few comments expressing disbelief. A handful of private messages from old school friends saying, "I often wondered why you put up with it for so long." Then, the situation escalated as if a floodgate had opened. Scores of shares, hundreds of comments. Neighbors, old teachers. Even people I barely knew began to share their thoughts. One neighbor wrote, "I recall seeing her shoveling their sidewalk by herself. When she was just 16. While her parents shouted from the porch." Another added, "Cullen was always boasting about how he didn't have to pay a dime for home expenses. Once Avon started working, stories began to pour out, like long-held secrets finally being revealed. It became clear that people had noticed more than they had ever acknowledged. They just hadn't said anything. Until someone had the courage to state the facts plainly. Meanwhile, Cullen and Vera were in a state of alarm. Cullen was the first to try to fight back. He shared a sharp, angry post. "Every family has its disagreements. My daughter tends to overstate things to get attention. It's quite sad." It failed miserably. In the comments, people weren't falling for it this time. "Funny how you never mentioned her paying your bills. Until just now," someone replied sarcastically. "You don't seem too unwell to be using her money." Another person added, with brutal honesty. Then Vera took a different approach, playing the victim. Voicemail after voicemail flooded my phone. "Avon, please, your father is not in good health." I had no idea he was going to write that. "This is all just a big confusion. Please remove the post before people start to think poorly of us." There was a time when that desperate tone would have broken me. Not anymore. I understood now that this wasn't about remorse. It was about their public image. That afternoon, Nora and I went to the autumn fair. In the town center. The cool air smelled of caramel apples and fresh hay. Kids were shrieking with joy in the bounce houses. The town's old brass band was getting ready on the stage. By the town hall, I could feel people looking at me as soon as I got there. It wasn't with disdain anymore. It was with something gentler, more somber. A kind of shared understanding. I walked past Mrs. Langford, my former elementary school teacher. She gave me a slight nod and a faint, sad smile. Mr. Collins, from the local hardware store, gave a silent tip of his hat. Finally, as Nora and I were getting close to the pumpkin decorating area, a woman I hardly recognized, one of Vera's acquaintances from church, approached me. Her touch was light as she placed a hand on my shoulder. "You deserved much better, my dear," she said softly. "We all suspected it, we just didn't have the courage to speak up." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I held them back. I nodded, whispering a quiet thank you. That felt too small for the comfort it brought. Standing there, in the center of the community, where I had once felt so unseen, I had a realization so clear. It was almost painful. The disgrace was never mine to bear. It had always been theirs. As the day turned to evening, the town square was illuminated with strands of festive lights, and the aroma of grilled corn filled the air. Children were laughing, music was playing, and for the first time, I didn't feel like an outsider on the fringes. I was my own person now. Later that evening, as the fireworks lit up the sky over the town hall, in flashes of red and gold, I stood quietly, my head tilted up, watching the sky burst with color. A soft voice seemed to say to me, sometimes the most spectacular shows come only after the most severe storms. And this time I wasn't running from the aftermath. I was emerging from it. The scent of smoldering leaves filled the air as I stood by the window of Nora's apartment, watching the small town get ready for another crisp autumn night. The world outside seemed serene, unaffected by the fact that my own life was on the brink of yet another confrontation. 2 days had gone by since I shared the truth. I had nearly convinced myself that it was all done. That perhaps, just perhaps, the final chapter would be written in silence. Then, I heard a knock. It wasn't a rushed or aggressive knock. Just a courteous, almost hesitant, tap on the door. I looked at Nora, who was peering at me over her coffee cup, her brow creased. I walked across the small apartment and opened the door to see a police officer standing on the doorstep, holding a large brown envelope. Miss Avon Marin, he inquired, his tone flat. Yes, I replied, a feeling of dread already starting to form in my stomach. He presented me with the envelope. You've been served with a civil action. Any inquiries should be directed to the contacts provided inside. I expressed my thanks, shut the door with a quiet, automatic click, and looked at the envelope as if it were a venomous creature. I didn't need to look inside to know who had sent it. I sat down at the dining table, slid my finger under the seal, and took out the documents. Inside, Cullen had initiated a legal action against me. The accusations would have been comical if they weren't so vicious. Theft, emotional abuse of an elder, financial desertion. It was a fit of rage disguised in legal terms. Nora scanned the papers over my shoulder, murmuring, incredible. They're attempting to ruin you just because you left. For a fleeting second, that familiar sense of guilt returned, sharp and painful like an old wound being reopened. The same voice that had plagued me since I was a child seemed to whisper, maybe you're overreacting. Maybe you should have just kept your mouth shut. But that voice no longer had any hold over me. Instead of letting my thoughts spiral, I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the firm foundation of the truth supporting me. Not this time, I said out loud, getting to my feet. I'm finished feeling sorry for saving my own life. By midday, I was on a call with a legal assistance organization in Columbus. I laid out the entire situation, calmly and systematically, and sent them the evidence I had already gathered. Every payment, every bill, every recorded instance of my support. They listened, asked insightful questions, and then confirmed they would assist me in preparing a countersuit. If it came to that. You have a very solid case, the legal assistant told me. And frankly, it seems like you're the one who should be suing for being taken advantage of. I wasn't looking for retaliation. I just wanted my life back. That same day, I followed their suggestion and submitted my own official grievances. This time detailing years of financial exploitation, driven by emotional pressure. Elder abuse, it appeared, could work in both directions. When grown children are used for their labor and income under the constant threat of guilt, the response was immediate. Vera was the first to call, her voice quivering with feigned sorrow. Avon, please, you're destroying our family. We were only trying to do what was right for you. You're taking this too far. You're aware your father is not in good health. I did not reply. An hour later, Colin's message arrived, a final venomous strike. You may think you've won, but family will always have the final say. I looked at it for a while, the words starting to blur slightly, as a mix of anger and sympathy fought within me. Then I opened the small drawer next to my bed. Tucked away in a corner, gently wrapped in a piece of tissue, was the small plastic cake decoration I had purchased for myself on my previous birthday. The birthday they had transformed into an eviction notice. A lone candle, a fractured memory. I held it in my hand, contemplating the absurdity of how much optimism had once been contained in such a tiny, insignificant item. Family is not about who you share blood with, I said quietly into the still room. It's about who makes you feel like you are important. 2 days after that, I was standing in front of the police station. Legal documents in my grasp. With a volunteer representative from the legal aid organization by my side. The building was a simple gray box. No more intimidating than a local post office. Yet the significance of what it stood for weighed heavily on my mind. Inside, Cullen was seated stiffly at a worn-out wooden table, with Vera next to him, her hands anxiously twisting the handle of her purse. They seemed smaller than I recalled. More bitter, more frail. An officer calmly informed them that if they went ahead with the baseless allegations, they could face a countersuit for slander and financial exploitation, charges that were likely to hold up with the proof I had. Cullen's face flushed a deep, alarming red. He pushed his chair back, the leg scraping loudly on the floor. "This is a setup," he yelled at the officer. "She's twisting everyone's perception." No one said a word. Vera slumped in her chair, her sobs echoing loudly against the bare walls. I didn't react. I remained silent. There was no need for me to say anything. As they left in a huff, the officer looked at me and said in a low voice, "You made the right choice. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Outside, the sun was incredibly bright against the crisp autumn sky. I stood there for a second, letting the warmth of the light sink in. The courthouse stood behind me. The town stretched out before me. The air had a fresh, vibrant smell, like a mix of endings and new beginnings all at once. With each step I took away from that place, the burden I had been carrying for so many years seemed to grow a little lighter. No more justifications, no more remorse, no more apologies. As I walked through the parking lot, a breeze came up, gathering fallen leaves and making them dance around my feet. It was as if the world itself was sweeping away the final traces of a life that was no longer mine. The courthouse got smaller in my rearview mirror. As I turned onto the main street, my windows open, letting the cool autumn air stream through the car, like a cleansing ritual. For the first time in a very long while, my heart didn't feel like it was weighed down by a heavy stone. No phone buzzing with guilt-ridden messages. No texts demanding apologies I no longer owed. No more tearing myself to pieces, trying to hold a family together that had never really been whole. I was on my own. But being on my own, I discovered, was more peaceful than I had anticipated. I stayed at Nora's place for the next few days, going through the simple motions of everyday life. Brewing coffee, doing the laundry, strolling to the local shop for groceries. Ordinary activities, but done without a sense of dread. Without expecting someone to shout a command, hand me a bill, or tell me I was indebted to them just for being alive. It felt unfamiliar and wonderful. One morning, as I sat at the small kitchen table with my laptop, I came across an advertisement for a little apartment for rent. In the center of town. It wasn't anything special. An older brick structure with creaky floors and drafty windows. But it could be mine if I chose. And for the first time, I did. By the afternoon, I had signed the rental agreement. I didn't tell anyone but Nora. She just smiled, passing me a worn coffee cup to celebrate. To fresh starts, she said with a nod. To finally putting myself first, I replied. The following weeks passed in a gentle, pleasant rhythm. I collected used furniture, one item at a time. A sofa with faded cushions. A rickety dining table that had been cherished by someone else before me. I painted the apartment a soft blue, the shade of clear skies and calm breaths. In the evenings, I would sit by the one window in the living room, watching the city lights flicker on and off, like faraway stars. And somewhere in the quiet moments, I came to realize that the silence was no longer a void. It was something I had earned. One Saturday, as I was unpacking the last of my things, I discovered it at the very bottom of a box. A keepsake from a different time. The tiny plastic cake decoration. The one from the birthday that had marked the end of everything. I held it in my hand for a long time. The late afternoon light catching its worn, chipped surface. It didn't cause me any pain to see it now. It no longer served as a reminder of my losses. It was a testament to my resilience. I set it on a shelf above my workspace. A small, personal emblem of victory. Not to commemorate the people who had caused me pain, but to honor the young woman who had refused to let it break her. A while later, a note was slipped under my door, with no name or address on it. Inside was a brief message in neat handwriting. You were never the one with the problem. Some people are just threatened by those they can't manipulate. I never learned who it was from. I didn't have to. Because I was already certain of the truth, the ultimate truth. Family isn't something you gain through self-sacrifice. It's something that is either given unconditionally or not at all. And in their stead, I was creating something they could never strip away from me. Inner peace, self-worth. A life built not on duty, but on my own choices. As I sat by my window that evening, the city lights casting a soft glow below, I smiled to myself and spoke the words I had spent my entire life waiting to truly feel. I am enough. Sometimes, leaving the people who brought you into the world is the only path to finding the person you were always destined to be. While we may be connected by birth, it is respect, trust, and compassion that form a genuine family. Have you ever been in a situation where choosing your own path meant giving up everything you believed you couldn't live without? I would be glad to read your story in the comments. If you saw a reflection of yourself in this account, be sure to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. Because here, every experience is valued. Be resilient, be authentic. Family conflicts do not have to shape you. How you overcome them is what truly matters.